Hi, welcome to Inspire with Liz. Today's guest is Jamie Johnson, who is an alum of our Cooperative Master of Divinity program. This program allows students to engage in studies in traditional areas of Christian ministry in an interfaith environment before moving on to complete degrees at Yale Divinity School, Boston University School of Theology, Drew Theological School, or Chicago Theological Seminary's online program. Jamie is continuing her studies at Chicago Theological Seminary, and recently she got hired at a Connecticut hospital to be a chaplain. Come with me and learn a little bit more about this new chapter of her life. Thank you for coming to this small interview. Tell us a little bit of your experience with this program. What's your favorite class?
Great. Well, my name is Jamie Johnson, and I actually completed the Cooperative MDiv program at Hartford International, which I'm going to try to remember to call it Hartford International because I knew it as Hartford Seminary. I completed it last May, so just about a year ago. And I have transferred through that program to another seminary, but the foundation I got at Hartford International really has served me so well. The favorite class would have been the one I took during the January intensive, and that was one of the theology of chaplaincy classes, which I stayed on campus for a whole week because class was like 9 to 5, and in the evenings, I lived in the dorm because this was pre-COVID. It was literally a month and a half before COVID, and in the house lived two of the other people studying chaplaincy. One woman, a Muslim from Turkey who now lives in the United States, and then a Muslim woman from Malaysia who also now lives in the United States. And then we'd invite our friend of ours who was a Muslim from Indonesia to come, and we'd sit and talk about the different meanings of the holy and the sacred and our calls to be chaplains, or what we're going to do with these degrees when we were finished and what else did we have to do to finish. It was the best week, I think, of my whole seminary experience, both at Hartford and now where I am right now. So
that's incredible. What was that call like? What's your background and what prompted you to enroll in this Cooperative Master of Divinity program?
Right. Well, I'm an adult learner, a return to school person. My first degrees were in art history. And so I actually hold a PhD in Victorian art. And I worked in museum education in New York City and in Chicago for about a decade, designing programs for students, elementary school students who would come on tours of the museum. So, I trained the docents, I'd set up different art activities. And I loved art history, and I got to know about the objects, the material, cultural of religion from all over the world, because at the various museums we had not only Western Christian pictures of the crucifixion or the Virgin Mary, but we had this will show how long it's been since I've done it, but different objects from, say, West Africa, or the Plains Indians, the Native Americans. So it was fascinating to work with the objects. But in the middle of that career, my wife and I decided we wanted children. And so we had twins, and I stayed home with them, and which was a wonderful privilege and exhausting and all those things. I left my museum career behind. And during the course of raising children, I had some health challenges. And through that experience, kind of the combination of motherhood and some chronic pain issues, I started volunteering at hospice. And I loved it. And so for 8 years, I was a hospice volunteer. And I realized that was my calling. I didn't want to go back to museums. As much as I loved art, I wanted to serve my community, particularly people who were going through crises of illness or injury, kind of the greatest suffering often in their lives, and the loved ones who surrounded them. So one of my supervisors at Connecticut Hospice, a Reverend Warren Godbolt, said, "Have you thought about Hartford Seminary, as it was called then, about Hartford International. And the priest who was at hospice said, "Oh, I got my DMin from Hartford International with, MT Winter. You really should try it." And so I looked at the course schedule and I took 2 classes as a special student, a non-matriculating student, because I thought, oh, can I go back to school? Do I know enough about religion? As I said, I'm a Unitarian Universalist, so we don't necessarily focus on the Bible, so I felt behind. But taking those first 2 classes, I realized I was up to the challenge to finish the degree, which is what I need to become a board certified and endorsed chaplain in my tradition.
So this new job that you got at the hospital,
Mhm.
how was the process like? Was it like a very competitive environment? And what made you qualified or stand out? What do you think made you stand out among other candidates?
That's a good question. So I think a lot of it had to do with network. So that class I've mentioned with Tracy Maramuska, which was the class I took during the intensive, she brought in chaplains from various places to speak to us. And one of them was a chaplain at the nearby hospital. And after the class was over, I reached out to that chaplain. I said, "Hey, your hospital's not very far away, and we're both from the Unitarian Universalist tradition. Can I just come down and talk to you about chaplaincy?" And she said, "Please come on down." We had a great conversation, and I actually did a clinical pastoral education unit at that hospital from November 2020 to May of 2021. So, I did the 400 hours and all the didactic hours with my cohort. And when that was over, I wasn't ready to do another CPE unit, but I kept watching to see if they were going to be hiring, chaplains, not on a permanent, but yeah, hiring chaplains. So lo and behold, job opening came up, and it was one that I could meet the qualifications of because I do have, a year plus of seminary. I've done the CPE units. I knew her, I knew the hospital, and so I applied, but I still had to go through all the steps. I met with HR and talked about not only my call, but how I remain calm in stressful situations, or how you deal with the heavy load of seeing such suffering.
What will a day in a chaplaincy job will be like? Like, what are your main duties? What could be the difficulties of this position?
Right. So, as a per diem chaplain, I kind of fill in the spaces that the regular day chaplains don't do. So, it's like being on call part time. So, it's usually 1 or 2 overnights a week, depending. So, my very first overnight, and I've done some when I was a CPE student, I'll show up at the hospital around 9 o'clock, probably a little early because of traffic in Connecticut. You have to make do to be early. Um, Check in. I've got my badge. I've always got a bag with me that has a change of clothes just in case, and snacks, because you never know. You don't want to eat out of the vending machine. And then
Yeah.
you look at the papers that they leave that say, "Please visit so and so," or "This is what happened today. You might want to check on them." And so then you walk the floors, and you might check on the suggested patients, because it's 9 o'clock, hospital time. Not everybody's asleep. Patients that are upset or nervous or experiencing pain would still be awake. But of course, the role of chaplain is not just to serve the patients. Um, it's to serve the staff as well. And so it's, quieter in the evenings, and you can check in and say, "How does it go for you today?" Or, "Is there anything I can offer you?" Especially if a unit has had a loss or a traumatic experience with a patient. There might be a note for me that says, "Please check in on such and such a floor," because, and especially with COVID and the pandemic, our healthcare staff are just under enormous strain. And so,
Yes.
as chaplain, I have served tea, I have rounded and passed out chocolates. Um, I've prayed with staff members, and with patients. So I round until it seems like everybody's asleep, and I have a way that if there's an emergency, I get called or paged or whatever we call it these days, texted. Um, because at this hospital, chaplains show up to every trauma. So if somebody goes into code blue, or if a trauma comes into the ER like a stroke, the chaplain is required to show up within, I think it's 10 or 15 minutes.
Mhm.
So if I'm rounding the floors, or if it's 3 in the morning, I, hop up, or I run down to the ER, and I'm present for the staff and whatever family members or friends are accompanying the patient. So some nights it's quiet. One night I did an overnight, almost no calls once I finished rounding. One night I was called on the same individual 3 times because the individual kept having a stroke. And so I kept showing up. You never know what the night could be like. We do have a little room that we're allowed to sleep in, and there's a bathroom and a shower, so there is a chance of not being awake all night. But sometimes that adrenaline kicks in and you're just up, or if it's sad, you need the time to relax, and then you wake up really early and you do rounds again. So you're up by 5 or 6, checking on people who might be awaiting a procedure that morning,
Yes.
checking in with the new unit, the new shift that's coming on to check on the patients you saw the night before. By 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm off. I pass my notes off to the next chaplain and go get coffee, or maybe my second cup of coffee, or how many ever cups of coffee, or tea, or whatever it is. So, yeah, that's kind of what I'm expecting for the first. Those are what my shifts will be like, mostly overnight, and then responsible for any traumas that come in.